Well, ladies and gentlemen, in this video, I wanted to go through the ultimate Trump strategy to get to 270. What is the easiest path? What are some different options for Trump potentially based on the polling we've seen develop really over the past week to week and a half, with a few of the states becoming maybe slightly safer? You're looking at like Arizona, Georgia, maybe even Nevada swinging to Trump, along with North Carolina. It's more so the Sun Belt versus the Rust Belt. I'm not even saying the Rust Belt's going to be hard for Trump to win, but it does look like at this point the Sun Belt's going to be easier, which makes for a very interesting scenario because if Harris wins the Rust Belt, Trump wins the Sun Belt, and nothing else changes, Harris will get to 270, Trump will be at 268. But that would require Harris to upset Trump in all three of the Rust Belt states, especially Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, where Trump is a favorite according to the polls and also the betting in those states. But when you look at this, whether or not you agree with this map, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm sure a lot of Trump people don't agree with this map, considering what's going on in Virginia, what's going on in New Hampshire, also Trump visiting New Mexico. But right now, we're just going to keep it simple. We're going to say this is the map. And when it comes to each of these states, I would say at this point, Arizona is about a 3 to 3.5, maybe even 4 point win for Trump. I would say Georgia is very similar, about a 3.5 point victory based on a few of the top pollsters there. All of the recent polls, really, in Georgia, outside of one, say that Trump's going to win the state by around 2 points at least. And even the one poll that doesn't have him has it as a tie. So Georgia and Arizona look really good for Trump right now. North Carolina, I would say, is getting to that point, but it's not there yet. The polling is definitely not as good in North Carolina as it is in Georgia or Arizona, but it's still pretty good. And also the betting is looking really good, around 70 to 71% chance Trump wins North Carolina. You're also looking at Nevada. And now Nevada, it's a little bit different because a lot of it's based off of early vote enthusiasm, and especially Republicans getting to the polls in more liberal counties like Clark. But still, I would say Nevada at this point also would trend to Trump. So now you've got Trump at 268. That's where that the district in Nebraska comes in play. If he would have taken that, or if they would have made it winner take all, like the state winner take all, and just Nebraska straight up 5 electoral votes, you would see Trump at 269. So he would, worst case, tie. That would be losing the entire Rust Belt. Now, when it comes to the Rust Belt, my prediction, I think the easiest path is just Pennsylvania. I mean, obviously it's any of these, but in terms of the easiest state to win for Trump, it would be Pennsylvania. Right now, Trump, he is a favorite in Pennsylvania. The polling is close. The polling in every Rust Belt state is basically the same outside of Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, a little bit better for Trump than Michigan. And that's really based off of a few recent polls. It fluctuates daily. I mean, we saw polling a week ago where Trump was winning the Michigan polls by around 2 points on average. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania were closer, and now it's flipped. But Pennsylvania is thought to be the most Republican Rust Belt state. And obviously, Ohio is also a Rust Belt state, but nobody talks about it because it's going to go to Trump. But it would be just Pennsylvania. I think that would be the easiest path in terms of strategy. You take Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, you don't need them at all. You're at 287. I also think you would at least take Wisconsin. Personally, I have him winning all 7 of the swing states. And that's, I mean, it's not even a biased thing. He's the favorite in all 7 of the swing states. Really, according to all the betting, all the models, the only thing you could argue is maybe Michigan. When you're talking about like certain models like 538, they hand select polls that tend to be favoring towards liberals. And also another fraudulent thing that they'll do is you'll get a pollster that was terrible in 2020, terrible in 2016, specifically polls that underestimate Trump, and they'll give him a grade of an A plus, and they'll weight them heavily. So you're factoring in polls that were already erroneously bad in 2016 and 2020 that way underestimated Trump. That's where the human error comes into play with these models, and that's what they do. And sir, listen, I'm not saying if a poll was really bad in 2016 and 2020 to completely discount it, because you can have bad cycles. But we can't be giving these pollsters that were 9 points wrong in 2016 and 2020 A plus grades. I mean, there's no point in even doing a model if you're going to do that. It's just completely ridiculous. But either way, that would be the easiest path for Trump, I would say. Outside of that, I mean, also I would have Trump winning these states as well. These states would be very, very close. Pennsylvania might be 2, 3. Michigan's probably about a point. I think Michigan, everyone's been asking, what is the closest swing state out of the 7? I think it's Michigan or Nevada. One way or another, to me, it's going to be Michigan or Nevada. Maybe it'll be Wisconsin, but that would be my prediction there. I think Georgia and Arizona, there's going to be 2 or 3 point wiggle room there for Trump. North Carolina, about 2 point victory for Trump at this point. And then Pennsylvania could be around 2 or 3 as well. So that would be easiest. Obviously, this gives Trump 312. There's other scenarios, though, we could factor in. Let's say Harris takes both of those. Trump still wins, obviously. Let's say Harris sweeps the Rust Belt. I think they're going for broke in the Rust Belt. That would put her at 270. Now, if you're Trump, there are a number of things you can do. It does not look like that second district in Nebraska is going to work for Trump. There was a poll that just got released that has Harris up by 12. I don't think she's going to win it by 12, but it's probably going to be about a 6 or 7 point victory for Harris in that second district. There's just been bad polling there. That is the Omaha area, and it's just not going to happen. So when it comes to Trump, what can he do? Well, we did see a poll in New Hampshire that had Trump up very slightly by half a point. Obviously, that doesn't mean Trump's automatically the favorite in New Hampshire. He's still an underdog, pretty significant underdog, about a 20-25% chance to win the state. But New Hampshire tends to have a lot of independents. It's not this liberal, crazy state. So the idea that Trump, who's performing better in basically every state than he did in 2020, the idea that he would win a lower populated state like New Hampshire and swing a bunch of people that are already registered as independents, it's not that surprising if it ended up happening. So you could just take New Hampshire, that's only 4 electoral votes. It's kind of an easier state to swing, and you're at 272 to 266. You lose the entire Rust Belt, but you win the election. That's why having the Sun Belt is so important, because now you've got a number of paths, and that's why Trump is making these visits to a Virginia, to a New Mexico, because it's the exact same thing in that scenario. Let's say Harris ekes out a victory in New Hampshire, which I do expect her to win New Hampshire, by the way. Trump wins Virginia with the Youngkin factor. He wins the election very easily. Let's say Harris ekes out a victory in Virginia, holds off Trump, wins it by 3 or 4 points. Trump ends up winning New Mexico. He's visiting New Mexico. It's possible. It's not likely, but that's another victory there. So Trump is trying to expand his map to where you're not necessarily relying like Harris is on one specific scenario. Now, whether or not Harris and her campaign thinks she can maybe take Georgia or North Carolina, I would imagine at this point it would more so be North Carolina and Nevada. Those would probably be the Sun Belt states that Harris still thinks she could potentially get. So it would be those two states, and it would have to be very, very close victories. I don't think North Carolina is happening. Nevada, you could argue, well, maybe people overreacted to the early voting, the Republican edge that they had there, because the polling's been very close, and Harris has led the polling for much of the cycle. But that's what Harris would want. Now, if that happened, if she did take Nevada and North Carolina, and Trump and her kind of split the Sun Belt states, you would need Trump to win at least two of these, or I guess actually that's very interesting. So Trump would really only need to win Pennsylvania. That's why Pennsylvania is so important. So Trump loses Nevada and North Carolina. He takes Pennsylvania, but also loses Michigan and Wisconsin, and he still wins the election. It's a weird setup, and it's not likely that the Rust Belt states vote differently from each other, but we're talking about very slim margins. In 2016 and 2020, they were very slim. So it is possible that Pennsylvania goes to Trump by 1 point, but he loses Michigan by 0.7, just because, again, the margins are very slim. We haven't seen it happen, much recently, but it is technically possible. I don't know why I have Indiana like that. but so even in this scenario, that's why Pennsylvania, it's so important. Georgia looks so good for Trump. Arizona looks so good for Trump. You only need Pennsylvania in that scenario. You don't need a Virginia. You don't need a Minnesota. You don't need a New Hampshire. You don't need North Carolina. You don't need Nevada. You still win the election because of those 19 electoral votes. It is so very key. This is not you could argue that maybe this is the easiest path for Trump, honestly, because you don't even need Nevada or North Carolina, but you do need Pennsylvania. And right now, there's a better chance Trump wins North Carolina than Pennsylvania. But that just goes to show you how important Pennsylvania is with the 19 electoral votes. You've got a lot of room for error, not even needing Michigan, not needing Wisconsin, not needing North Carolina, not needing Nevada. He's won North Carolina in both 2020 and 2016, and we expect him to win it again. And obviously, you'd like some wiggle room there. And at this point, I would say this is another scenario. I just don't. Well, I mean, this is a possible scenario as well. Trump at 286. The Rust Belt gets split. She takes Nevada. Nevada to me still it's kind of 50-50. You could argue maybe Trump has a slight edge because of the early voting. I know the betting says he has an edge right now, but that is what you're looking at. And so I would say the easiest scenario is just some combination of taking Pennsylvania. You take Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. The election's over. Just like that. That's really all you need, and that's what really people have been talking about for a while. But the reason I don't talk about that as much now is because I think Trump's almost guaranteed. Well, you don't want to say that, but I think Trump is very, very likely to win Arizona. So if Trump's really likely to win Arizona, you have to factor that in. But technically, you really don't need Arizona. You can lose Arizona because there was a poll recently that came out that I think had Harris up by 1 in Arizona. Not that that's the end-all, be-all. But at this point, you're looking at Trump taking the three big ones: Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, 19 electoral votes, 16 electoral votes, 16 electoral votes. Trump wins like that just with 3 states alone. while also losing Arizona, Nevada, and also Michigan and Wisconsin. And so that's why it's so important. That's why Georgia looking good is so key for Trump right now, with like the seven last polls all saying Trump leads, like a 75% chance of the betting. North Carolina's around 71% chance. Pennsylvania's around a 60% chance. That's three states there where there's some wiggle room for Trump, where he's starting to extend his leads. There's also around a 75% chance Trump wins Arizona as well, but it's not key like a Pennsylvania is. You really want to get Pennsylvania. You want that combination. And that really could lead to an early night. Now, they're already saying, well, it's going to take multiple days. Pennsylvania's not going to be counted. But I think it's going to be very, well, it's the count is going to be a little bit different. People have to understand it's not going to be as crazy as it was in 2020 or even probably 2016, where the way Pennsylvania does it is they do the day of voting. So that's why Trump always has a huge lead and then it gets cut. It's the same thing that happened in 2016. Trump had a massive lead over Hillary. It got cut, but she didn't cut it enough, and he ended up winning. With Biden in 2020, it was a total debacle. Trump was up by 14 points with like 55, 60% of the vote counted. And then Biden made the comeback over a span of like 4 days, which was just a total mess. And so I think we'll know early on, but we also have to factor in, this is another thing to take into account. There's going to be more Republican, or the Democratic advantage in terms of the early voting in Pennsylvania is, it's not minuscule, but it's extremely small compared to where it was. They talk about the firewall of 1.1 million votes in 2020. It's around like 370, 380K right now. So it's been, it's been slashed to like, a third of what it was. So if Trump is able to get a nice lead on the day of voting, they're really not going to have much runway to make up all of that with their early voting that gets thrown in there after the day of voting gets counted. Because Trump's going to go up in Pennsylvania as long as they count their vote the exact same way that they've done the last two cycles, which is they do the day of voting first, because Republicans are going to win the day of voting, no doubt. And then the early voting comes in. That's where the Democrats make it up. They're not going to have that 1.1 million vote advantage with the early voting to come dump in to try and overcome the Trump lead on the day of voting. So it'll be a little bit different in terms of that, but that's something as well that we're going to be watching. But I think, I mean, I know people are talking about, what about North Carolina, or what about New York and stuff with Trump doing the rally? It's just not going to happen in New York. I mean, I think, listen, you want to talk about the margin in New York, we can talk about that and maybe getting it under 10, although I think that's also going to be very hard. I think, I've always said that the New York margin, 11 and a half, 12 and a half would be amazing for Trump. That's why the popular vote now is coming into a potential Trump victory in terms of that. I think it's going to be very close, and Trump very well might win the popular vote. And New York's going to be a big reason why. If you lose that state by 23 points and you slash it down to 11 or 12, you're making up many, many votes there. And also, you're taking a look at a state like Florida going from a 3-point victory to a 12-point victory. That's also going to help. Texas is very likely going to stay. I mean, we've got, a lot of the polls now saying Trump is going to win Texas by more than he wanted in 2020. Now, it is a more favorable environment for Trump, but it is remarkable that, since 2020, all of the migration because of the pandemic from California, from New York, from states that cost a lot of money, liberal states, to Texas, and they're still not making up any ground in Texas. And we're very thankful that this is a very, good environment for Republicans, and how bad the Biden-Harris administration was, at least viewed in terms of the public. They did not view it favorably at all. That's why Harris is not campaigning on it. She's going against it. She's saying, I'm going to do things differently. Although I guess she couldn't really explain that, but that's her campaign strategy. She's like, she's separating herself from the Biden campaign or the Biden administration, and that's why Biden really has some animosity against her. But either way, guys, that is just, I think, the best, obviously the easiest scenario is Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, but right now the Sun Belt looks really good. Nevada, I would still say, is around 50-50. Michigan's probably borderline. It's going to be the closest Rust Belt state. Wisconsin, I think you're talking about like a 1.5, 2-point victory for Trump. Pennsylvania, I think that's the state where you can get a 2.5-point victory in terms of that. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.